Welcome everyone to the Circular Economy Week London. We have a masterclass today on European Sustainability Regulations. I'm Flavia Salles, Market Manager here at Finboot, and I will be moderating today's session together with Juan Miguel Perez, CEO of Finboot, and Alvaro Lobet, Head of Product here. First of all, we would like to apologize for the misunderstanding regarding the time of starting our event, but don't worry, we are going to share the recording with everyone who registered for this session. We all know that regulations like the EUDR, ESPR, the PPWR, RED, CBAM, CS3D, are reshaping global supply chains. And today's session isn't just about explaining the rules, but about exploring how business can transform compliance into a competitive advantage through traceability and technology. And before going ahead, I encourage you to pop up your question on the comment section. So we are going to answer them during our Q&A session after our panel discussion. And meanwhile, I can see that more people are joining us. So if you feel free to tell us on the comments where you join us from. We know that we have people from all over the world. It's an international event, so feel free to pop up that. And of course, I invite our speakers to present themselves. First of all, Juan, welcome Alvaro as well. So please, if you don't mind, explain a little bit, present yourself, and we can start the session from today.
Thank you, Flavia, and hello, everyone. My name is Juan. As Flavia said, I'm the CEO, and I'm one of the founders here at Finboot. We have quite a significant track record in helping organizations in industrial and hard-to-abate sectors with their sustainability and decarbonization strategies, and particularly linking those to basically the compliance agenda with things like the EU Green Deal, of which we're going to be touching on several regulations today. We also help these customers on leveraging sustainability, as Flavia mentioned, as a competitive advantage, as a market opportunity, and as an avenue to new revenue streams and unlocking market premiums. And hopefully throughout today's masterclass, we can kind of give you some of the highlights or kind of guidance of how that could possibly be translated into your organization, and the role as well that digital technology can play on helping you meet some of those targets. Happy to be here, and Alvaro, over to you.
Thank you, Juan. Well, pleasure to be here today. My name is Alvaro Llobet. I'm the head of product here at Finboot, developing our product from the beginning, more or less around 8 years ago, looking into how European regulations have been shifting and adapting our customer needs into our product. No, we are going to discuss many different things. As you all know, there's many different news around the European regulations, and there's a lot into how our technology and how technologies in general can help you provide solutions for these regulations. No, so then, Flavia, I will give it back to you.
Thank you, Albert. Thank you, Juan, for the presentation. So yeah, I think we can start. Juan, if you don't mind, can you, through your presentation, show us the big pictures of European regulations, of conversion, and how companies worldwide need to pay attention to them?
100%. Before I jump into those details, I just want to give a very kind of high-level intro to who we are at Finboot, just to give everyone who may not know us kind of that background info on what is it that we do and what role do we play within the digital traceability and sustainability landscape. Finboot is a green supply chain management company that, as I kind of mentioned before, we work with organizations in industrial supply chains, particularly in sectors like oil and gas, chemicals, steel, aluminum, automotive, right? So very complex supply chains, very hard to abate sectors, all of whom are going through this intense process of energy transition and decarbonization, partly driven by their own market pressures and partly driven by the regulatory pressures, right? And essentially what we have created at Finboot is a digital platform for traceability that helps them simplify and automate a lot of the burden that is kind of related to some of those decarbonization strategies and paths, particularly with everything that has to do with supply chain traceability. So understanding where raw materials are coming from, tracing their manufacturing process, and communicating product information downstream of their organizations, specifically when we're talking about low carbon, circular, and renewable products. You can see here a little bit of a kind of high level view of who our customers are. I'm sure you may recognize some of these organizations. They include some of the largest chemical manufacturers in the world, flagship logos in the energy space, as well as the steel and automotive space. And we've been successful enough that some of these organizations are not just our customers, they have also invested in the business and have helped us kind of grow our organization, which gives us an incredible insight to the main challenges that these industrial stakeholders are having and the role that our technology can have. That's all I want to cover from kind of the Finboot background, and we very much want to jump into the details now. For our masterclass, again, this is all about navigating European sustainability regulations. The way it's going to work out is we're going to give a bit of an introduction, Alvaro and myself. So there's going to be a few slides, but I do promise it's not going to be that by PowerPoint over the next hour. But rather, we want to just give a solid background over the next 10 to 15 minutes, and then very quickly move into a discussion, which is going to be moderated with Flavia, where we're going to be covering some questions around these main regulations, as well, of course, as any questions that you may have yourself on what we are covering today, right? So what we're going to cover, right? We can't include everything in the EU Green Deal for this session. So we've taken some of the ones that are, for one reason or another, kind of more in the news recently or more linked to that digital traceability angle. We're going to be talking about EUDR for sure, which is the EU's Deforestation Regulation. That's where we're going to spend most of our time because of the timely relevance, let's say, that EUDR has, and you'll see why that is in a minute. But we're also going to talk a little bit about ESPR, which is Ecodesign for Sustainable Product Regulation, sorry. And then PPWR, that one is about packaging, which is the Packaging and Packaging Waste Regulation. And ultimately, although not necessarily linked to sustainable products, but very much linked to industrial decarbonization, we have the Renewable Energies Directive, right? Which again has a lot of implications on how we're going to decarbonize our industries and our global supply chains. And lastly, of course, we couldn't talk about navigating sustainability regulation in Europe in 2025 without talking about the various omnibus processes that are ongoing in our legislative process. You've got Omnibus 1 with things like CSRD, CS3D, and CBAM. But since then, there's been a number of processes that have also been rolled out to simplify additional regulations in the agriculture, battery, and basically many areas of what the EU Green Deal space has already kind of been dictating over the past few years. We're then going to take a different approach, and we're going to talk about material impacts and financial opportunities, right? So we don't just want to talk about the burden of compliance, but rather give you some insights of why this is important from an operational standpoint, from a risk standpoint, and also from a market standpoint, right? So what are the financial implications of ignoring regulation, or rather, what are the financial implications of, hey, let's leverage regulation for business value, right? And then after that, we will, again, jump very quickly into a discussion. So again, for the better part of the session, we're going to be talking or answering questions around all of these themes. My apologies. So let's start with a very brief overview of our 4 regulations for today. So the European Deforestation Regulation, which is first on top, and as I said, we'll take more time deep diving into that. The regulation was introduced in 2023, and the whole concept was we want to guarantee that we prevent the access of products that are linked to deforestation into the European single market, right? So in order to achieve that objective and make sure that our products here are all deforestation free, we then need to introduce certain traceability requirements in those global supply chains to make sure that that as products are crossing into the market and as they are being placed in the market once in the EU territory, that they very much fulfill, let's say, those requirements, right? And it's all about what data do we need to capture, what process do we need to follow, and how we're going to report on that. Again, more on that in just a minute. We then have as well the Ecodesign for Sustainable Products Regulation, so ESPR. This is the regulation that guides everything that has to do with digital product passports, right? So again, you might have heard about digital product passports. They are essentially a way in which we can capture enriched supply chain data and data that substantiates the sustainability credentials of our products, so that we can communicate those downstream of the supply chain and guarantee that products are reused, recycled, and basically managed appropriately and sustainably for their end of life, right? The ESPR covers different sectors and has different timelines for different sectors, right? So depending on the sector that you are, you may already have obligations that are kicking in 2026. And there's already a very detailed working plan between 2026 and 2030 of what are some of those core obligations that are going to be rolling out, right? So we're not going to talk a lot about ESPR today, but we do have a tremendous amount of resources both on the regulation and on digital product passports. So I do encourage you to check out some of the content on our website, or just reach out to anyone in the team and we can expand on that as well. Next up is the Packaging and Packaging Waste Regulation, also kicking in some requirements or compliance commitments as soon as 2026, sorry. And this is all about resetting the amount of recycled content that needs to be in our packaging, also introducing requirements of how packaging is to be collected, so that, again, could be reused, could be recycled, and what needs to happen to those packaging products as they move through the supply chain, right? So that's, again, another core implication. It has a lot of links to the digital product passport and to the ESPR as well, as packaging, of course, is very much a core part of our products, right? Similarly, just in the interest of time, we're not going to cover it in a lot much more detail, but we do encourage you to kind of get access to some of our content to learn a bit more about that, right? And then lastly, the Renewable Energies Directive, right? So this one plays a huge role in industrial decarbonization because in its third revision, is starting to look at other sources of energy other than electricity, right? And it's starting to amplify kind of that scope of how do we figure out our access to low carbon or low carbon gas or biogas, even biogas and biomethane. What role can hydrogen play, especially green hydrogen, and in the decarbonization of our industries? What is the role as well as some of these transition fuels like sustainable aviation fuels that are produced from used cooking oils? And it's just setting up all of the rules on reporting, data gathering, and traceability that all of these very diverse energy products that are all having a different angle on our sustainability agendas and our kind of broader industrial decarbonization, just setting the groundwork and the basis of what each of those needs to comply and what it means. We are going to be touching a little bit in some of this in the Q&A, but again, if you have specific questions about any of those regulations, feel free to kind of ask them, and we'll make sure to include them as part of our discussion. But for now, let's have a closer look at the EUDR, right? So that deforestation regulation that wants to ban products linked to deforestation unless producers and market players can prove otherwise, right? It's been on the news. Well, it's been on the news pretty much consistently over the past 12, if not 18 months, right? Just to give you a bit of background, EUDR, I mentioned, came into force in 2023, but it had an implementation timeline, like most of these sustainability regulations do. The original implementation was December 2024 for large and medium companies, and June 2025 for small and micro enterprises. Last year, actually around this time, the European Commission had proposed a delay. That delay was then kind of confirmed, and the regulatory timeline was pushed for a year, right? So current implementation timelines is December 2025 for large and medium enterprises, June 2026 for micro and small enterprises. But of course, nothing is as easy as it may sound. We've already had kind of some minor technical changes be introduced in 2025 as part of this broad scheme or pressure for deregulation that the European Commission has been leading in 2025. And some minor changes had happened. About a month ago, actually just before we did a very similar version to this masterclass in the New York Climate Week, the European Commission publicly announced its intent to delay EUDR once more, right? So very much in line with the deregulatory policy, let's say, or agenda rather. And that's something that has had a lot of pushback over the last 4 weeks, right? So there's been even members of the commission itself standing up to say, we shouldn't delay this. We've already delayed it once. We need to make sure that it gets through. The same has happened in the co-legislator bodies. So in the EU Parliament, several MEPs have come out and voiced their concerns that another delay is essentially showing a lot of uncertainty and a lot of inconsistency from a regulatory body, which is a lot of which is significantly concerning. Not to mention, again, you would ultimately be rewarding those who did not prepare for the regulation and punishing those who have been investing in being ready for the regulation. So with all of this into consideration and all of these kind of arguments here and there, just yesterday, the EU Commission formally introduced the proposal that they are now kind of kicking off that legislative process, where they actually don't touch the December 25 deadline. So EUDR, it's now confirmed. It will be it will start to be compliant or mandatory for large and medium enterprises as the 30th of December of this year. Under no current scenario that we have on the legislation, either our current regulation or the proposal for changes from the EU Commission, does that change. The Commission does, however, introduce certain modifications into the regulation to simplify compliance, right? And some of the kind of main elements that it does is there is a delay for small and micro enterprises. So instead of June 26, they're pushing that deadline up to December 26, which again can ease some of the burden, let's say, on the smaller stakeholders. We then have a new categories and new language introduced into the regulation. There's something called downstream operators now, which essentially now have a more lax, let's say, approach to the regulation. They no longer have to submit due diligence statements. They do still have to kind of carry out certain work. Albert is going to tell us a bit more about that process in a minute. But it is true that the role, let's say, has been somewhat eased in this process, right? And there's also some changes that have made it so that local players, local producers within the EU, about 70 to 75% of them are covered within a new category as well that essentially simplifies compliance processes for them as well. So it's all about making it easier while at the same time keeping the core mechanisms to guarantee deforestation-free products within the regulation. There's some risks in these changes as they are introducing certain flexibility, which may lead to loopholes. So certainly the regulator needs to be very conscious of how much are we opening ourselves up to risk in this, and how much can be bypassed if we relax the rules too much. But it is a good sign, and it is a sign of certainty and basically sustained climate leadership that we are committing to not moving that December deadline. Now, that's kind of the update on what has been happening. This proposal still needs co-legislator approval. So that means that over the next month or two, we're still going to be seeing more of EUDR on the news, more debate on how these changes are going to end up working out. And very likely we will be very close to that deadline before the final outcome is kind of confirmed and we know what the final requirements are going to be. That being said, again, because time is running out, if you're a large or medium enterprise, if you have started your EUDR compliance process, then that's excellent news. Keep going. Make sure you have the capability to adapt to these minor technical changes. And if you haven't started that journey, we do encourage you to kind of reach out to us for sure if that's of interest, but to get started at the very least, even if you're not going to be speaking with us, because it's not an easy process necessarily, and it does require certain operational changes across your organizations and in different units of your organization. So we do encourage you to take a step. Now, in order to understand whether EUDR applies to you or not, you essentially have to look at the commodities that it applies to. So there's a few kind of high-level groups of commodities: soy, beef, palm oil, wood, cocoa, coffee, and natural rubber. So those are the kind of the classes of commodities. Within each of them, you have different product codes, right? So everything's being looked at from an HS code, essentially a trading code for each one of the products. And there's a comprehensive list of products in what's known as Annex 1 for EUDR, where you can identify very much to every specific detail which products need to comply and which products we need to basically trace to guarantee these deforestation-free credentials. Now, why is this important? Basically, because of the impact that can have from a penalty standpoint. So fines can go up to 4% of annual EU turnover. The enforcement also includes product seizures, market bans. So it very much has some very relevant implications in terms of a penalty and enforcement standpoint. So you do want to make sure that you have your ducks in a row when it comes to EUDR compliance. The list of products is also expected to be revisited. So while you can check the products in that Annex 1 now, again, that's a list that will continuously be updated, and then it will likely include other additional deforestation-linked products. Now, to understand in a bit more detail what this means from a traceability standpoint, I'm going to ask Alvaro to jump back in, and he's essentially going to tell us what are the different scenarios in which these commodities are landing in the EU market, and what do we need to do from a traceability standpoint in each of those. So Alvaro, over to you.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. Sorry for that. So thank you, Juan. So if we go into the next slide, that is going to show you a little bit of a diagram of what we need to do. No? And as Juan said, one of the things that we need to take a look into is that now the regulation is changing and has suffered some changes. But if you are buying from outside of the European Union, any of the raw material that is inside Annex 1, you will need to do this process. No? So that hasn't changed. Depends on the size of the company that you are, but if you are enforced by EUDR at the beginning of next year, you will need to do this. No? And let's start by, I would say that the key of everything, that is traceability. No? First of all, you need to have a really good relationship or a way of communicating with your suppliers, because everything comes from the information of your suppliers. No? Imagine you are an importer or you are a producer here and you're buying palm oil from Indonesia. A good example. inside the EUDR. First of all, imagine you are putting a PO for them and you are sending them information. I want 1,000, for example, liters of palm oil. That is going to come inside the European Union. The first thing that you will need is the GeoJSON. What is a GeoJSON? Imagine it as a kind of a line and a set of directions inside a map that is going to show you where that palm oil is coming from. So the physical land inside Indonesia or any country that is you are importing from that is coming, that raw material, that is a GeoJSON. No? That information is going then to be used to understand if that plot of land is or is not deforested. No? And that goes into the next step, that is step number 3. No? Once that you have the GeoJSON, what you're going to do is perform a deforestation risk assessment over that plot of land. What we do at Finboot, and usually what companies do, is get into a remote sensing provider or company that what they are going to do is on that specific plot of land, they are going to do or receive an image, a satellite image, and they are going to compare it into the cutoff date of the EUDR, that is 2020. No, they are going to compare those two images, those two plots of lands on different periods of time, and they are going to assess you if there has been or not deforestation. If there has not been deforestation, all is great, you can go through. If not, you will need to read your supplier because that good should not enter inside the European Union. Once that you have the okay, that is not deforested, then you will need to go into step number 4. And what that will mean is that you will need to submit information into traces. Just to put into context everyone, traces is the system that the European Union has developed so that you can submit all of the information of your commodities that you're importing inside of the European Union. But, and this is very, very important, the European Union is not going to check all of the information that you're going to put into traces. So you are responsible to checking that those goods are not deforested. Everything that goes inside traces should not be deforested. So you should have checked it previously to that. No. Once that you have the DDS created, that is submitting this information into traces, you will receive 2 values, a reference number and a verification number. I always like it to call it like a username as a password. Imagine it like that. If you have both of them, you can access the information from another supplier or provider from traces. No? What you will do then is you will send this reference number and verification number into your clients so that they can access the information that you are sharing with them. Your goods are also non-deforested. No? As you can see, this process doesn't change at all with the changes. No, we're going to go into the next one, but before that, Juan, anything you want to comment around this or any comment? No, if not, just
well, I think generally clear, Alvaro. Thank you.
Jump over it. So what is changing is a little bit this process, what we call trading. No, so imagine that instead of buying outside of the European Union, you are buying inside of the European Union. So that product is already or has already been created in traces. So you have a reference number and a verification number. Before, what we needed to do is kind of like follow this process, create products, and then create a new DDS. What we have seen that the regulation has changed is that you don't need to create a new DDS. What you will need to do is store all of the DDS and reference and verification numbers from your provider so that you can demonstrate that the goods that you are using are the ones related into those imports. No? One thing that I would like to disclaim that is not exactly clear, but we suggest you, is that the European Union is always making you responsible of the goods that you are managing. What that means is that either you are buying inside of the European Union, and even that information is in traces, you don't exactly know if has or not been deforested the raw material that you are using that has been imported. No, so we suggest you check that deforestation, or you can put mechanism in place for checking a certain number of those TDS and reference number so that you make sure that your products are not deforested. No? So this is a little bit exactly the same. No? So you will receive the DDS, the reference number, and the verification number. You will be able to access that information in traces. You don't need to check it. The regulation is not going to enforce you, but remember, you are responsible for the goods that you are using. So we suggest you check some of them. No, and once that is verified, you can use them. You can use them inside your supply chain process. You can do whatever you want. No? And I think that covers a little bit the full process. Again, I will just do a disclaimer around the regulation is changing. There has been some changes. We think that this will be the process to be enforced. We just need to be also aware that maybe there's some things that are going to be tweaked, because also when this comes into action, beginning of 2026, this may vary a little bit, but we think that this is a little bit the process that is going to stay. No. So now, Juan, I will return back
Just
to you.
for clarity and just kind of re-emphasize some of the points you've already made, Alvaro, right? Exactly. The process we see on the screen right now, it's essentially the process as is today under EUDR and what's rule of law today, right? The proposal introduced by the Commission just yesterday changes this process ever so slightly, in which the third step we see DDS information linked, and essentially the operators here in the EU submitting their own DDS at the end of their due diligence process. That's what's been proposed that we removed from the process, right? So ultimately, you don't have, if you're buying inside the EU, to submit your own DDS. You essentially have to guarantee the traceability of the products, DDS you received, and how that goes downstream of you towards your customers, right? It is a significant implication, right? Because it very much, the whole reason this is done is so that we ease the burden on the EU system, on the traces system, which is a system that by the Commission's own admission has a lot of limitations. And what they wanted to do is, let's just prevent people from overloading our system, which is not, let's just be clear, not properly developed, right? So it's not at the right level of a reporting system. And they're saying, just don't send me a lot of information because I'm not going to be able to handle that. But still, you have to make sure that those products are compliant, and you have to make sure that you have all of the data in the case of inspection, audit, or investigation, right? So that's why Alvaro recommended as well, while you may not be being asked explicitly to do these checks, some of these checks are things that you will have to, or you should do nonetheless, to minimize the risks of non-compliance. Now, with that, let's move a little bit away from regulation and look at kind of the broader influences or the broader drivers for digital traceability in sustainable supply chains, right? So beyond regulation, why is this important? Why is this relevant? Why does this deserve our time, efforts, and limited resource, right? And the reality is that, again, yes, regulation is certainly one driver, is perhaps the most annoying one of them, to put it in some way. But there's two other, I like to say, R words that play a role here, which is risks and revenue, right? So risks is very much driven to supply chain disruptions, right? So climate events are basically more frequent. They're just going to get worse. We've already seen evidence of that. There's growing evidence. There's growing events. This is not a matter of if, this is a matter of how bad it's going to get, right? So we need to prepare our supply chains for that. We need to prepare our supply chains for more resilience. That means we need to understand our supply chains much better, map our supply chains, have more visibility throughout those supply chains. And all of that is something that digital traceability can give you, right? So in order to minimize the risks you're going to have, particularly with some core raw materials that may be a very critical part of your own production ecosystem, you need to make sure that those supply chains are very resilient, that you have the right connections and influence and communications with your suppliers to make sure that data is flowing freely, and that you have basically different scenarios you can react to in the case of some of these disruptions, whether that is from climate events or even geopolitical issues, which are also getting a bit more common these days, right? Then there's the matter of market opportunity, so that revenue side of the picture, right? We've already seen in the sectors that we work for that is low carbon, renewable, and circular products go out for premiums in the markets. Sometimes it could be marginal. Sometimes it could be as much as 2 times the value of the products or 3 times the value of the products. Of course, that has some implications on the cost of your raw materials as well, but there is a significant value opportunity here that we need to tap into, right? So again, buyers are only going to pay those premiums, especially business buyers are only going to pay those premiums if you can demonstrate and back up your claims. So that's when traceability comes back into the picture. Even if you rely on a voluntary certification standard, that very much will require you to have some traceability so that you can pass the audits and the processes of those voluntary frameworks as well, right? So all of these kind of fulfills the picture of supply chain traceability and supply chain sustainability is not just about regulation. You have risks, very much significant operational risks, and you have value opportunity to unlock premium markets and premium revenue from your buyers, right? And there's already evidence of this as well, right? So just don't take my word for it. There's research out there that kind of shows, and this is bottom line results, right? So how, again, companies with strong results on material ESG issues have achieved 6% higher annual returns than those with weak results. Sorry, I realize there's a small typo there. But essentially that it very much impacts your business. And again, this is from a study that has looked at data over the past 20 years or so. It doesn't just look at environmental details, it also looks at some social and governance elements. But the reality is that ESG issues, broad lens ESG, kind of full spectrum, is now more than ever more likely to become financially material. And as these new regulations come into place, that probability is just increasing more and more. And the impact that will have in your returns is also going to increase. Now, with that, I know we've covered probably a bit more, but the updates on EUDR were certainly worth covering in detail. But I think we still have some time for Flavia to come back and join us and maybe have a little bit of a discussion, Flavia, on some of those questions you have lined up. You're on mute, Flavia.
Okay, sorry about that.
There you go.
So thank you both for setting the scene. I think it was a great intro about the regulations. And it's clear that even if regulations may shift in time or scope, compliance, it's not going anywhere. And of course, the pressure on global supply chains will only grow. It's clear. So let's kick off our panel discussion. I do have some question here. And of course, if you have, who is watching, have any questions, please add them to the comment section. And we are trying to respond them during the live session today. You already mentioned, both of you, about the changes around EUDR, but at the same time, we have the omnibus package, and both of them are reshaping the way many regulations will actually be applied. And so I want to start asking you both about these 2 points. So I think, well, you were talking before, so that's why I'm going to start with Alvaro.
Yeah.
So Alvaro, with what I've said, from your perspective, what do you think that these potential changes to the EUDR means for companies preparing their supply chains, more specifically regarding the implementation steps?
So I'm going to start around, I think that EUDR and any regulation regarding sustainability nowadays that implies traceability, data from your suppliers, from many different parts of the supply chain, are not quick to implement. And we know that because of a fact, because of we have implemented with our clients this type of traceability and methods. No? So what that means is it requires time, effort, coordination, collaboration, and that, like the delay, even though, as Juan said, is because of the technical capabilities of the platform, I would say that maybe it's a little bit of time also to make sure that you are complying okay. And I don't think you should delay that decision, meaning it's going to take you more than 6 months maybe to implement, and Juan is going to speak maybe around how we implement it quicker to be able to do it. But for you to fully understand the complexity, it's going to take you time, it's going to take effort. So I think that even though there's a delay, you should start, if you have not started complying now, because if not, you're going to have a problem of timing. at the end, these things take time, and one more when you are a large enterprise, no? So even though from our side, many times we can implement very quickly, the changes and all the methods that you will need to implement inside your company to be able to comply will take time. So I would say that delays for me at the end doesn't mean you should delay your implementation. In fact, maybe they are buying you a little bit of time to make sure that you are doing it right, and that you whenever this is completely enforced and you will need to be reporting everything, you are doing correctly. No,
Yeah.
Juan, I will
Just,
give it back to you.
just a couple of highlights to also clarify, because again, all of this is very new. The proposal from the Commission came out yesterday, and I realized this 6-month adaptation window is something that we didn't cover in the main part of our session, or in the intro part of our session, which is essentially, again, we're not talking about a delay here. So obligations for large and medium enterprises start on December 30th, 2025. That's according to the current version of the regulation, but the same remains for the proposal the EU Commission has introduced yesterday, right? What the proposal has, which now needs co-legislator approval, is an adaptation window of 6 months, which frankly is something that they had to put in place, because with all of the noise they've given us over the past, certainly month, very intense, but pretty much over the entire year of will it not be delayed? Again, it's caused a lot of uncertainty. It's been an irresponsible approach, if you ask me. So then the adaptation window was necessary. What the adaptation window means is your compliance starts on December this year, but for the first 6 months, the regulator is going to say, we're not going to find anyone. We're not going to enforce this. We're going to let you get used to these systems, right? We don't know the details of how this is going to work out operationally. What I can kind of do as an educated guess is you're going to have goods coming in through customs. They're going to ask for the reference number. They're going to check whether this is due diligence have been submitted. If they aren't, you're kind of going to get told off in a way by like, hey, remember, you need to do this. This is compliance, blah, blah, blah. But probably nothing other than that within those 6 months, right? But it's going to get increasingly more pressure as we get closer to that window. So the whole point is we have to act like Alvaro was advising us, which is start implementing now. Make sure you have at least the first version of your business, of your systems by December 30th. And then you have a learning curve, right? The technology side is not complex. You can be onboarded choosing the right partner, but you can certainly be onboarded within the next 60 days, even less so in a more simple processes. But the adaptation and the behavioral or kind of change management, as we said, within your organization that is very large, that's going to be a process, right? So that will certainly fall into that adaptation window, and that's more of a reason why you should start now, so you have a bigger time to guarantee that change management goes according to plan.
Okay, thank you. So the key recommendation here is that companies should keep moving forward, and that this change, they are only giving companies a little time. They are buying a little time, a little extra time, but the regulations and the requirements will be there, and they will need to comply anyway. So now is the time so they can prepare their supply chain to do everything they need and be able to proceed with more safety and using the technology, being partner with their suppliers the proper way. So thank you for complementing this answer, Juan. And well, because you took the lead, the next question will be for you. But I want to talk about the omnibus package. The package proposed significant change, from shifting threshold to narrowing the DDS scope. And how do you see this development reshaping the regulatory landscape, and what signals should global companies take from it?
Yeah. Thank you. Again, there's just so much to cover, and we want to keep the session as interactive as dynamic as possible. And that's why I realize now I cut some of the omnibus part that I wanted to cover, and I did say in the intro that I would cover. But yeah, let's understand, like, let's kind of take a step back and see what the EU Commission kind of started 2025 doing, right? So this all comes off the back of the Draghi report that was released almost a year ago, right? When a report that was commissioned by President von der Leyen herself, where she asked, okay, can we kind of see what's wrong, what's going wrong in the European kind of economic system, and what do we need to change? And the report focused mainly on three things. I think we did, Flavia, an insight episodes that probably came out December or January that focuses on the EU competitiveness compass, and it talks about this specifically. It talks about, yes, competitiveness from an economic standpoint. It very much talks about sustainability, and it talks about innovation. It kind of seemed that they went all in for one vertical, which is how do we guarantee competitiveness? And the only solution they saw is we guarantee competitiveness through deregulation, right? That was kind of the conclusion I get from the behavior we've seen in 2025, right? Because we're not talking enough about climate in 2025, and we're definitely not talking enough about innovation in 2025, right? So then it's all about deregulation. Omnibus 1, which was introduced in February this year, was the beginning of that story, right? So it was first the stop the clock provision, which was speedily approved for CSRD, which is a non-financial reporting directive for the EU, CS3D, which is all about supply chain due diligence, and it carried some significant changes of how we need to map and manage our supply chains, our global supply chains, from a sustainability and from a kind of social and environmental standpoint. And CBAM, which is the carbon border adjustment mechanism. So it stopped the clock on all of them, meaning none of the previous deadlines now persist, let's say, and it's all being reopened, right? It's gone through a very tumultuous negotiation process. I think just last week or the one before, the jury committee of the EU Parliament finally agreed on CSRD and CS3D. The Council has also fixed their position on CBAM. So some of the changes are already starting to take shape. The regulations, all of them are being significantly slimmed down, and a lot of the provisions have been taken out. The number of companies that need to comply is now at least an order of magnitude smaller than it originally was. But the process is still not finalized. And actually, just today, there was a vote in Parliament because the Commission wanted to kind of bypass the debate in the plenary session and take it directly from the jury committee to trilogue negotiations. I won't get into a lot of details of the legislative process, but they wanted to speed this up. And the MEP said no, right? So they lost that vote, and it's like, no, let's have a serious conversation about it, right? So I think what is good, and Omnibus 1 is now an example of that, and EUDR is an example of that, is that what started the year as basically blind wave of deregulation is now facing some serious pushback, right? So you're not going to get away with kind of gutting all of these regulations. We're not going to get away with dismantling the EU Green Deal. And a lot of that pushback is also linked because the mounting evidence of the influence of some foreign fossil fuel organizations that are lobbying against the EU Green Deal and some of its regulations, right? So with that evidence in front of us, some of our legislators have taken a step up and said, no, we got to make sure that things things keep under control with our climate agenda, right? Now, I won't expand a lot on this, but essentially, Flavia, as you know, in addition to Omnibus 1, there's been at least 3 or 4 more Omnibus processes that have kickstarted. Yep. They look at things like battery, at agriculture, at defense, a couple of other areas that I can't remember off the top of my head. And all of these are ongoing processes, right? So it is part of that deregulatory agenda that President von der Leyen herself voiced just a couple of weeks ago in Copenhagen. Like, it was the first time she openly talked about Europe needing deregulation and no longer trying to manage that under the disguise of simplification. But on the other side of that coin, again, we have some legislators that are pushing back and are trying to make sure that our climate regulation, which was first in the world and put forward some of the provisions we need globally, not just in Europe, that those provisions remain intact, right? And or at least with very little changes. And I think that's certainly important for how Europe prepares for the next few years and how climate is going to continue to disrupt our supply chains.
Okay, thank you, Juan. I think in beyond the policy headlines, I think the real challenge here for companies how to actually respond to them, how to get this visibility across suppliers, networks, how to manage fragmented data, and of course, how to use the technology to turn compliance, as you mentioned before, in a business advantage. So maybe Alvaro can answer me these questions: how companies who often struggle with fragmented data and, of course, limited supplier visibility, which is such a challenge for sustainability regulations, and how sustainability can use technology to overcome this challenge. And maybe we can focus on the traceability, of course, point of view.
So yeah, Flavia, I think that one of the most important things is that now traceability and collaboration with suppliers is not something you can bypass, something that you need. So you will need traceability, you will need collaboration, and that at the end, if it's a manual process, mostly for large enterprises, will be a pain, will be really complex. You will not be able to manage it, no. So then there is where technology takes a place, no. At the end, what the technology enables us to do is to make things simpler in that sense and more automated or with less effort, no. So I think that with suppliers, a personal recommendation we have seen from I would say that many implementations that we have done is take it simple. No, you don't want to overcomplicate with your suppliers the number of systems you have. You don't want to overcomplicate your process. I would say that is implement something that you know you need, very simple, very concrete. Don't try to build too many systems. Don't try to build too many connections. Don't also enforce your suppliers to use specific systems. Try to adapt to them in the way you can. So all of that are going to then help you integrate your supply chain together with them, have, as you said, less fragmented data, try to have all of the different pieces of information from your products from the source, in this case, those plantations, to the production, to the delivery to your clients. No, so I would say that many of the times, and I think that I include myself on that, we tend to overcomplicate processes. No, we should try to make them as simple as we can.
Okay,
And
thank you.
technology helps us on that.
That's what the technology exists for, right? To help us to facilitate and make our life easier. Okay, thank you, Alvaro. I see that we have questions on the comment section, but before going through them, I have at least one question more for Juan, that in this case, and I think maybe his question is connected with one of the questions that we have here. So Juan, I want to give a jump to another point of view regarding this topic, that many regulations are often seen as a burden, but from your perspective, how do you think that they can turn this compliance burden into a driver of value creation? I mean, beyond the compliance itself, what opportunities that the digital traceability, for example, can unlock?
Yeah, so there's a combination of factors you can use, right? So one is essentially the premium pricing that low carbon, renewable, and circular products have in some of these markets, right? So it's essentially, in order to unlock premium pricing, you need to back up your claims, right? People are not going to pay premium pricing unless they can see the evidence, right? And those are dynamics that we are already seeing mostly on spot purchases, but we're going to see that more in kind of general market dynamics, right? So digital traceability, very simply put, will help you unlock premium markets. There's another opportunity you could leverage that is linked, and it's linked to one of the questions as well in the chat, which talks about what data should go in digital product passports. I think the way I'm going to take advantage, Flavia, and kind of jump in and answer part of that question already. One thing is what ESPR requires, right? So it essentially says you need to share certain details on material composition and how, essentially guidelines on how to manage those products in the end of life. So for reusability, recyclability, and so on. And then mapping out the chain of custody as well, right? So you need to map out the chain of custody, particularly of critical raw materials, right? So where they were sourced from, certain elements, when depending on the materials, then you need to have a more extensive due diligence, and that needs to be captured as well there. But then that's kind of an element of differentiating between what ESPR asks to be in a digital product passport. And we actually have a checklist, so let's make sure that we can send Marta the article that shows kind of the different points that the DPP should have from an ESPR standpoint. But there's also the business opportunity of the DPP, right, which looks more about broader and rich supply chain data, right? In order to monetize digital product passports, what we want to do is capture data beyond the regulatory requirement that our buyers are willing to pay for, right? And that could be certain enriched supply chain data on more details on material composition, a demonstration that certain feedstocks are renewable or they come from waste streams or so on. So there's elements there that we can play with. Visibility, we can play with supply chain visibility beyond what the regulator asks us, because some buyers want to have more visibility in the supply chains and they're willing to pay for that. So how do we leverage enrich supply chain data to unlock value as well, right? So that we can actually monetize data in the DPPs. And in order to do that, we need to then take two levels of that data, right? What the regulator asks me to provide, and on top of that, what else can I gather that I can leverage as a commercial tool in the market?
Yeah, you definitely answered Marta questions already. I'm adding to the screen right now, but anyway, so I think we can go to jump to Carol questions, and then because we are almost at the end of the event, we can go back to you and closing the session. But Carol, she's asking, and I'm going to add to the screen, it's what extent are buyers and retailers start to require third-party verified traceability and deforestation-free claims to work with suppliers or access certain markets? Who want to answer this one? Maybe you, Juan?
Yes, sure. Sorry, I was just sending Marta a link as well. So buyers asking for the traceability data on deforestation. So it depends on who the buyer is. What we've seen in EUDR in particular is we've seen a large group of first movers who have gotten ready, who for months now have been asking their suppliers to provide this data. The data is essentially what you need for a DDS, right? So they're asking for geolocation, land plots, information on certain supplier risk assessment elements, so more social analysis of those suppliers. And that's kind of the requirement that say that they've already rolled out. Some of them are already receiving that information on a business as usual or are getting ready to do so. But the reality is this hasn't been scaled up or normalized as a requirement in the industry. A lot of suppliers maybe are not being asked of this because a lot of companies were hesitant to invest in changing their organizations and their processes to be EUDR compliant because of the uncertainty, right? So if they have been asked, it's all about geolocation, land plots, and anything that links to either deforestation or supplier risk assessments, and that is required to carry those out. If they haven't asked suppliers yet, with all likelihood, they started doing that today, or they're going to be starting to do that very, very soon, because now they know, again, compliance starts in December.
Okay, thank you. We have still another question, but because we are running out of time, it's a question from TLM, but we are going to answer these questions on LinkedIn page, so don't worry. And just before to close in this event, I do have a last question for you, Juan. Looking ahead, do you see traceability become a license to operate across all industries, not just regulated ones like the ones we mentioned today?
I think so, and increasingly so, right? So that concept of a license to operate is already being floated around, right? So it's like, okay, yes, in order to sell certain products, either the regulator is asking you to have certain data or the buyer is asking you to have certain data, right? And that's just growing more and more. And ultimately, even if the regulator doesn't ask, what we've seen, and we've seen this before, right? Once that bar is raised by other players in the market, you ultimately either were one of those first movers or you'll have to play catch up, right? Because if you're not sharing this data and your competitors are, then ultimately people want to see that information, right? And before this becomes business as usual, the opportunity to leverage this for the business value is now, right? Because now is a competitive edge. Now is a differentiator. Anything we do beyond regulation is like, that's an asset, right? The moment that becomes business as usual, or that becomes the new normal, it's no longer an edge, right? So you got to make sure that whatever you're going to monetize, that's going to happen over the next 3 to 5 years, right? And with that, Flavia, as you say, we're coming up to the end. So we have a couple of key takeaways in the same line. So if we can bring the slides back to the team backstage. There you go. Thank you very much. Very much in the same line of what Flavia told us, right? So awaiting regulatory certainty is a lost opportunity, right? So right now it's about, okay, let's understand the regulatory direction, and there's enough clarity there to see where we are going from a sustainability and traceability standpoint. Let's leverage that for strategic business opportunities by getting ahead of the regulator, right? And being sure that we can unlock market opportunities. Traceability and sustainability, it's also evolving into risk management, right? Because even if we don't care about the business opportunity, the opportunity for premium pricing and so on, supply chains are being increasingly disrupted, right? So you need to make sure that by having visibility and data and maps across those supply chains, that you can react quickly to some of these climate events and supply chain disruptions, right? So it's all about risk management as well, right? And ultimately, and this is the comment I just made before, acting now implies a competitive advantage, right? And just as a final thought now on how we're moving into action, again, today, we kind of broke down the what, why, and how of some of these regulations. I know there's a lot that we maybe didn't cover, but feel free to reach out and we'll provide more details on that. But hopefully, kind of you're going away or walking out of here with a message and an understanding that traceability is no longer just a regulatory requirement. It very much is a strategic lever for your business. And again, waiting too much could be a sign that you are falling behind. So thank you, Alvaro. Thank you, Flavia. And thank you, everyone else who watched us today.
Thank you.
Thank you both. And we once again, I can see that some new people are joining the session. This we do apologize for the misunderstanding regarding the session start time. We are based in Barcelona and the event in the UK, so the time zone just was tricky on us. So, but don't worry, we are going to share this session with everyone who registered in advance. So don't worry. And again, thank you for everyone who's watching us. We do encourage you all to keep this discussion alive because we know that regulation is moving fast, and this is the opportunity to talk among your peers. And as Juan mentioned, you can always reach out to Finboot, to our channels, and to our webpage. And once again, enjoy the rest of the Circular Economy Week in London, and see you next year. Bye, everyone.